The Thompson family Christmas dinner sparkled with perfection, or at least the appearance of it. Evelyn had outdone herself this year. Snow fell in picturesque flurries outside the bay windows of their Concord home, landing on evergreens that might have been plucked straight from a New Hampshire tourist brochure. Inside, pine-scented candles flickered among holly sprigs and glass ornaments arranged with military precision on the sideboard. I smoothed my napkin across my lap, feeling the weight of the heavy linen, the good napkins brought out only for holidays and dinner parties where impressions matter more than comfort. The table gleamed with polished silver that reflected distorted versions of our faces. Mom's collection of Waterford crystal caught the light, throwing rainbow prisms across the wallpaper. Dad carved the turkey with practiced efficiency, the blade slicing through with barely a sound. Perfect portions, just like everything else in this house. My sister Claire sat with perfect posture, her engagement ring catching the light every time she reached for her water glass. The new lawyer fiancé couldn't make it, emergency case preparation, but his absence hadn't stopped Mom from mentioning his Yale credentials twice already. "Madison, pass the cranberry sauce, please." Mom's voice carried that familiar undercurrent, the one that said this simple request was actually a test of my table manners. I slid the crystal dish toward her, careful not to let it scrape against the tablecloth. 20 minutes into dinner, and so far so good. Beside me, Evan shifted in his chair. I could feel his discomfort in the subtle way his knee bounced under the table. He had worn his best sweater, hair combed neatly, but Mom's eyes had flicked dismissively over him when we arrived. "So," Mom began, the word hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. "Still chasing stories for pennies, Madison?" There it was. I took a slow sip of water, buying time. The Manchester Gazette had been good to me. She delicately cut a piece of turkey, examining it before taking a precise bite. "I saw that little article you wrote about the farmer's market. Charming, I suppose. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dad suddenly became very interested in adding more gravy to his potatoes. Actually, Evan said, his voice warm with pride. Madison was about to become an editor. All heads turned toward him. I hadn't planned to announce this tonight. In Boston, he continued, squeezing my hand under the table, the Massachusetts Tribune. They loved her investigative series on the opioid crisis. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth, her eyes locked with mine, a flash of something dangerous behind them. Boston. Her voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded storms. "You were leaving New Hampshire for this newspaper nonsense?" "It was a great opportunity, Mom. The Tribune had won regional awards for—" "If you left New Hampshire for this—" "Nonsense." She cut me off, setting her fork down with deliberate control. "Don't come back. You were dead to me." The words hung in the air, crystalline and sharp. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly in the silence. Claire's fork clattered against her plate. My father stared fixedly at his green beans. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Cold sweat broke out along my hairline. A strange buzzing filled my ears like television static. "Evelyn," Dad murmured. Too late and too weak to matter. But Mom wasn't finished, 29 years old, and still playing at being a writer. "When would you grow up and do something worthwhile with your life?" Claire was already making partner by your age. The words weren't new. The tone wasn't new. But something about this moment, the Christmas tree lights, Evan's warm hand in mine. The opportunity waiting in Boston suddenly brought 28 years of conditional love into crystal clarity. I remembered being 13, publishing my first essay in the school paper. Instead of pride, Mom had grounded me for a month for airing family business in a piece about generational differences. I remembered Claire's science fair trophies displayed prominently, while my journalism awards disappeared into drawers. My whole life had been a careful dance of seeking approval that never fully arrived. Every achievement measured against impossible standards, every choice questioned, every dream diminished. Madison? Evan's voice sounded distant. Were you okay? I was not okay. I felt like I was seeing my mother, really seeing her for the first time. This control had been there all along. In every dismissive comment, every comparison to Claire, every subtle manipulation, the ultimatum wasn't new. It was just finally naked, stripped of pretense. My napkin felt suddenly heavy in my lap, like a physical manifestation of expectations I had carried for years. With careful deliberation, I folded it and placed it beside my plate, the gesture feeling strangely significant. Then I guessed that was goodbye. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Mom's eyebrows rose slightly. Don't be dramatic, Madison. You would be back when you needed money. Dad stared into his wine glass, saying nothing. His silence spoke volumes, the same conflict avoidance that had enabled this dynamic my entire life. Claire looked shocked, but I could already see her expression shifting, aligning with our parents as it always did. Madison, she didn't mean, Claire began. She did mean it. The clarity felt almost painful. And now I had a choice between living an authentic life or having your approval. I was choosing me. I stood up, chair legs scraping against hardwood. The turkey sat half-eaten, the perfect Christmas dinner abandoned. I walked to the coat closet, each step feeling like it carried me further from the person I had been when I arrived today. The choice between authentic life and family approval had never been clearer or more terrifying. The cold air hit me like a physical shock when I opened the front door. Snow continued to fall, oblivious to how my world had just shattered and reformed. I made it halfway down the porch steps before I heard footsteps behind me. Madison, wait. Evan closed the door softly behind him, hurrying to catch up. He draped my scarf around my neck, his hands gentle. You didn't have to decide everything tonight. In his eyes, I saw something I had rarely experienced: unconditional support. Not rescue, not taking over, just standing with me in this moment. I already had, I said, watching my breath form clouds in the December air. I thought I had just started my real life. He helped me into my coat, brushed snowflakes from my hair. We walked toward the car together, leaving perfect Christmas lights twinkling behind us. For the first time in my life, I was walking away from my mother's approval and toward something that felt terrifyingly like freedom. I had spent the week after Christmas sitting at my kitchen table, with my old journals spread before me, like evidence at a crime scene. Each leather-bound volume chronicled a different year, filled with my neat handwriting and the occasional coffee stain. January sunlight filtered through my apartment windows, casting a deceptive warmth over pages that revealed a cold truth. I couldn't believe I had never seen it before. I told Evan, who sat across from me, nursing his third cup of coffee. He had been patient, watching me piece together this puzzle of my past. My finger traced a journal entry from when I was 15. Look at this. I quit the debate team after Mom said my argument style was embarrassing the family. Then here, I flipped forward several pages. She told everyone I dropped out because I couldn't handle the pressure. The anger that had been building in my chest all week flared again. Not the hot, impulsive kind, but something deeper and steadier. The kind that clarified rather than clouded. She did the same thing with the school newspaper. I continued, finding another entry. Remember I told you I quit because I lost interest? That was her story. The truth was she hated that I wrote about local poverty issues instead of uplifting community stories. Evan reached across the table, his photographer's hands gentle as they covered mine. What about college? You mentioned something about pre-law. I pulled out a journal with my college years emblazoned on the spine. That was the biggest battle. I wanted journalism. She insisted on pre-law. Said writers were perpetual children who never contributed anything of value. My throat tightened at the memory. When I switched majors anyway, she withdrew tuition support. How did you finish? Evan asked, his brow furrowing. Dad secretly helped. He would deposit money into my account and tell me not to mention it to Mom. I shook my head, remembering my father's furtive assistance. It was the one time he ever went against her, and even then, he made sure she never found out. The pattern emerged with painful clarity as I flipped through more pages. Every major decision in my life marked by her interference. Friendships abandoned because they didn't meet Evelyn Thompson's standards. Apartments rejected because the address wasn't prestigious enough. Even my brief engagement broken off after Mom's relentless criticism of my fiancé's lack of ambition as a teacher. She had always used money and approval as weapons, I said quietly. And Claire enforced it all. The perfect daughter, setting the perfect example. I closed the journal, feeling the weight of revelation. This wasn't just about Christmas dinner or Boston. This was systematic, calculated control spanning decades of my life. Later, as evening settled over Manchester, I stood at my window watching snowfall. My world had shifted on its axis since Christmas. Every memory, every relationship, now viewed through this new lens of understanding. The childhood friend Mom deemed common because her father worked in a factory. The college boyfriend who mysteriously stopped calling after meeting my parents. The job offers I declined because they weren't respectable enough for a Thompson. It was like I had been living in someone else's story, I told Dr. Harper during our first video consultation. She was a family trauma specialist Evan found through his therapy network. Her office looked warm through the screen, bookshelves lined with volumes on psychology and healing. That was a common feeling when we started recognizing control patterns, she said, her voice steady and grounding. You were beginning to separate your authentic self from the narrative that was created for you. I nodded, pulling my sweater tighter around me. I always thought I was the problem, the disobedient daughter who could never quite measure up. But now I was seeing myself as an adult making choices, my choices. That was significant progress, Dr. Harper noted. What led to this shift in perspective? I told her about the journals, about the patterns I had uncovered. How Evelyn's Christmas ultimatum wasn't a spontaneous outburst, but the culmination of a lifelong strategy. She had always used that dead-to-me threat, I explained. When I wanted to study abroad in college, when I moved to Manchester instead of staying in Concord, when I dated someone she disapproved of, It had always been her nuclear option when other control tactics failed. Dr. Harper made a note. "And how are you feeling about the Boston opportunity now?" "Clearer," I answered. This wasn't about Boston, it was about control. If I gave up the editor position, there would just be another test, another demand. Moving the goalposts had always been her specialty. After our session ended, I called Evan. He was on assignment photographing winter wildlife, but he answered immediately. "How did it go?" he asked over the sound of wind. "Good," clarifying. I curled up on my couch, feeling strangely lighter despite the heavy topics. She helped me see things I hadn't considered. Like what? Like why Mom couldn't accept my independence without it threatening her whole identity. I watched the snow continue to fall outside. Her entire self-image was built on being the perfect mother who created the perfect family. My choices didn't just disappoint her, they undermined her core narrative. "That made sense," Evan said. "Remember when you told me about her mother? How critical she was?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Grandma Thompson set impossible standards. Mom was just repeating the pattern. The realization didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped explain the ferocity of her resistance. "It was a generational thing," Evan said. "My dad did the same with his father's expectations. The difference was he recognized it and broke the cycle. His words struck a chord. That was what I needed to do. Break the cycle." After we hung up, I started making notes about Dr. Harper's observations. She pointed out how Evelyn's perfectionism stemmed from deep fear of judgment, something I had never considered. How Dad's conflict avoidance enabled her control by creating a vacuum where another perspective should exist. How their combined dynamics made them formidable opponents in any bid for independence. Later that evening, the doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was snowing harder now, and I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Evan stood there, camera bag slung over his shoulder, snowflakes melting in his hair. "I thought you were photographing eagles," I said, surprised. They could wait. He brushed snow from his jacket. This seemed more important. We spent the evening at my kitchen table, mapping out resources and supports. Dr. Harper would continue weekly sessions. Evan knew people in Boston who could help me find housing. A college friend worked at a newspaper there and could introduce me to the local journalism community. I needed to build a life she couldn't control. I said, writing this down as our central goal. Evan nodded. A life where your choices were truly yours. For the first time since Christmas, I felt something beyond anger or confusion. Something like anticipation. The Boston opportunity wasn't just a job, it was the first chapter of a life I chose for myself. I looked at the journals stacked neatly at the edge of the table. They documented a past shaped by Evelyn's expectations, but they didn't determine my future. That blank page belonged to me. The following week, I sat across from Dr. Harper in her softly lit office, watching dust motes float through afternoon sunlight. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old books. Her bookshelf stood organized, but not too perfect, unlike my mother's display shelves, where even book spines must align precisely. "Tell me about your mother's reaction when you had disagreed with her before," Dr. Harper said, her voice calm but curious. She wore a simple cardigan in burgundy, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. Nothing flashy, nothing designed to impress. The opposite of Evelyn Thompson. It depended on the disagreement. I traced the pattern on the armchair. Small things she dismissed, bigger things she escalated until I caved. Dr. Harper nodded, making a brief note. And you had always eventually caved? The question landed like a stone in still water. Yes, until Christmas. And perhaps, what was different about this time, Madison? I considered this, the realization forming as I spoke it. This was about my whole life, not just one decision, and I was tired of living for her approval. Dr. Harper smiled slightly. You know, what fascinated me was how you had developed such strong investigative skills as a journalist, yet struggled to apply that same analytical thinking to your family dynamics. Something clicked. I could uncover corruption at City Hall, but I had been blind to what was happening in my own life. Not blind, Dr. Harper corrected, conditioned. Children were wired to seek parental approval, but Evelyn's love had been conditional on your compliance. I felt a flutter of recognition. She was a narcissist, wasn't she? I couldn't diagnose someone I hadn't treated, Dr. Harper said carefully, but the patterns you had described suggested strongly controlling behavior with narcissistic tendencies. The pieces fell into place. Her obsession with appearances, the golden child treatment of Claire, the constant criticism disguised as concern. The most important thing to understand, Dr. Harper continued, leaning forward slightly, was that her control worked because you allowed it. That wasn't blame, it was power. A small shock ran through me. What did you mean? What would your life look like if you chose it entirely for yourself? The question hung in the air between us, both terrifying and exhilarating. I had spent my career asking hard questions of others. Now I was finally asking them of myself. I had always had the power to walk away, hadn't I? The words came out barely above a whisper. Dr. Harper nodded. And now you were using it. Later that evening, I was making dinner in my apartment when my phone lit up. Evelyn's name appeared on the screen. My stomach tightened, but something else surfaced too. A strange new calm. I answered and put the phone on speaker while I continued chopping vegetables. Hello, Mother, Madison. Her voice carried that familiar crisp authority. I had been thinking about this Boston situation. You needed to reconsider. I made to do. 3 weeks ago, those words would have triggered an immediate defensive response, or more likely, capitulation. Instead, I set the knife down carefully. My career wasn't up for discussion, I said evenly. A brief silence. I could almost see her blinking in surprise at my tone. Darling, be reasonable. Her voice shifted to the syrupy persuasion she used when direct authority failed. The Gazette would probably give you a small promotion if you asked. There was no need to move across state lines for some insignificant title change. I had accepted the editor position, I said, arranging the vegetables in the pan. It started February 1st. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had hardened. You were throwing away everything we had built for you. What about the family legacy? Your grandfather's collection that I had been saving for you? Your trust fund? Had you thought about what you were giving up? The old guilt rose but didn't overwhelm me. I thought about Dr. Harper's words. I had always had the power. You made your position clear at Christmas, Mother, I said. My voice remained steady despite the pounding of my heart. You said I would be dead to you if I took this job. I was sorry you felt that way, but my decision stood. Madison Elizabeth Thompson. You listened to me. I had listened. For 29 years. Now I was choosing my own path. This was that boyfriend's influence, wasn't it? He had always been. This was my decision. I interrupted again. Not Evan's, not yours, mine. The silence stretched so long, I wondered if she had hung up. Then I heard her sharp intake of breath. We would discuss this when you had calmed down and come to your senses. Her voice was ice. There was nothing more to discuss, I said. Goodbye, Mother. The call ended abruptly. She hung up first. I set the phone down and realized my hands were shaking. But it wasn't fear. It was exhilaration. When Evan arrived an hour later, he noticed immediately. Something was different, he said, studying my face as he shrugged off his coat. Evelyn called, I said, setting plates on the table. She demanded I reconsider Boston. His eyebrows lifted, and I stood my ground. The smile spread across my face, slowly, like sunrise. She hung up on me. He crossed the room and pulled me into a gentle hug. When he stepped back, his eyes shone with quiet pride. That was huge. Dr. Harper said something today that changed everything, I told him. She helped me see that Evelyn only had power because I gave it to her. What did it feel like? Evan asked, reaching for the wine glasses. Terrifying, I admitted, but also like I could finally breathe. We settled at my small dining table with plates of pasta and glasses of red wine. For the first time since Christmas, I felt a genuine smile form. Not the polite mask I had perfected for family gatherings, but something real and unguarded. Let's celebrate, Evan said, raising his glass. To standing your ground, to choosing my own path, I added, clinking my glass against his. After dinner, we curled up on the couch. Evan pulled a small velvet pouch from his pocket and placed it in my palm. I had been waiting for the right moment, he said. Inside was a ring, not a diamond solitaire like Claire's, but a vintage piece with an unusual green stone surrounded by tiny pearls. It was peridot, Evan explained. It was supposed to help let go of what no longer served you. I slipped it onto my finger, admiring how the light caught the stone. Not a status symbol, but a talisman of transformation. It told your story, Evan said softly, not hers. I rested my head against his shoulder, watching the green stone catch the lamplight. The question surfaced unbidden. Could I really build a life completely free of her influence? The voice of doubt sounded suspiciously like Evelyn's, but for the first time it didn't drown out my own. Tomorrow I would call Dr. Harper to schedule another session. Tonight I was savoring this small victory, not just standing up to my mother, but standing up for myself. I marked the calendar with a red X. 10 days until Boston, 2 weeks to dismantle a life without setting off alarms. My apartment looked like an archaeological dig, distinct layers of my existence sorted into categories: take, leave, donate, trash. The coffee table had become command central, covered with checklists and a notebook I had labeled Independence Protocol. The name made me smile despite everything. It sounded like something from a spy novel, rather than the methodical dismantling of my mother's influence. 10 days. I whispered to no one. The reality settled in my stomach like cold stone. After the high of standing up to my mother during our phone confrontation, I had deliberately pulled back emotionally. That small victory was satisfying but dangerous. It would be easy to mistake a battle for the war. Dr. Harper warned me about this. Celebration was fine, she had said, but your mother had spent decades perfecting her techniques. Don't underestimate what was ahead. I opened my contact list and began the careful inventory of relationships. Each name required evaluation. Who stayed connected to me? Who stayed connected to Evelyn? Cousin Sarah, we exchanged Christmas cards but nothing more. She could remain. Uncle Thomas, Mom's brother, reported everything back to her. Limited contact only. My old high school friend Veronica was still close with my mother through the garden club. Potential risk. The process was exhausting. Each decision felt like cutting a thread in a complex tapestry. Too many at once and everything unraveled. Too few and I remained entangled. My phone rang. Evan. Just checking in, he said. How was Operation Escape Plan going? I had got 3 piles. Evelyn approved, Evelyn tolerated, and Evelyn would burn if she could. I surveyed my bedroom. Guess which pile was biggest? Please tell me you were keeping the leather jacket she called Commune Reject Chic. It was already packed. I made another note in my book. I called about a new bank account today. Found one with no fees and branches in Boston. Smart move. And I was getting my own phone plan tomorrow. No more family discount. Silence hung between us for a moment. You know, Evan said carefully, when we talked about this move before, it was about your career. Now it felt like I was dismantling my entire existence. I finished for him. Yeah, it had to be this way. Half measures wouldn't work with her. I closed my eyes, remembering countless compromises that never satisfied Evelyn. I needed clean borders between her life and mine. Later that evening, I spread out paperwork across my kitchen table. Boston housing listings filled my laptop screen, colorful pins marking potential neighborhoods on a digital map. I had created spreadsheets comparing costs, amenities, and proximity to the Tribune's office. Another tab held research on Massachusetts healthcare providers who accepted my insurance. My phone calendar now had color-coded reminders. Update mailing address, transfer prescriptions, schedule utility connections. I had even created a separate email account Evelyn didn't know about for all Boston correspondence. Dr. Harper's voice echoed from our last session. This wasn't just about physical distance, Madison. You were creating psychological infrastructure that could withstand pressure. She had helped me develop specific responses for the inevitable emotional manipulation attempts. We had role-played scenarios until my answers became reflexive rather than reactive. I emailed my new boss at the Tribune, confirming my start date and asking about orientation details. Another foundation stone in place, another connection that existed independently of my family's knowledge or approval. Evan and I had mapped out our own transition plan. He would stay in New Hampshire to finish his current photography contract, then join me in Boston once I was settled. The final week before Boston stretched before me like a tightrope. Every step calculated, every decision weighed. My apartment living room had transformed into command central with neatly labeled boxes stacked against the wall. The lease for my new Boston apartment sat on the coffee table, signed and dated, a tangible promise of what was coming. I checked items off my meticulous to-do list, satisfaction flooding through me with each completed task. Moving company confirmed, utilities scheduled for transfer, final story submitted to my editor at the Manchester Gazette, with a professional resignation letter attached. You had thought of everything, Evans said, bringing me a mug of coffee as I organized my files. His presence grounded me, a reminder that I wasn't dismantling my life alone, not leaving anything to chance. I replied, sorting through medical records to establish with new providers in Boston. Not this time. The morning light caught the folder labeled Dr. Harper Notes, sitting prominently on my desk. Yesterday's final in-person session had been bittersweet, though we had established a schedule for virtual appointments during my transition. "You had done exceptional work, Madison," Dr. Harper had said, her eyes crinkling warmly behind her glasses. "Remember what we discussed about setting boundaries without building walls?" My new bank accounts and insurance policies represented more than just practical arrangements. They were declarations of independence. Mom couldn't freeze accounts she didn't control. Dad couldn't play mediator through financial assistance. The separate phone plan meant no more checking my call logs or questioning my minutes. I ran my finger along the edge of my new credit card, my name embossed in raised letters. Madison Thompson standing on her own. Evan watched me from the doorway, leaning against the frame. "You okay?" You had been staring at that card for a full minute. Just thinking about how different everything would be, I tucked the card into my wallet. A month ago, I couldn't have imagined making these decisions without second-guessing myself. The knock at my door came just after 6 that evening. 3 sharp raps that sent my heart racing. Through the peephole, my father's familiar figure stood in the hallway, hands thrust deep in his jacket pockets. My first instinct was not to answer, to pretend I wasn't home. But that was the old Madison, the one who avoided confrontation at all costs. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "Dad." The word hung between us, neither welcome nor rejection. "Madison." He shuffled his feet, looking past me into the apartment. "May I come in?" I stepped aside, noticing how he took in the boxes, the dismantled bookshelves, the clear evidence of my departure. His face fell slightly. "So you were really going through with it?" he said, standing awkwardly in the center of my living room. The moving truck came Monday. I didn't offer him a seat, didn't offer tea or coffee. The ball was in his court. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I had seen 1,000 times when he was uncomfortable. "Your mother didn't mean what she said. She was waiting for you to apologize." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward. Of course, no recognition of what she did. Just the expectation that I would fold as I always had. "I wasn't apologizing for accepting a promotion, Dad." My voice remained steady, though my pulse quickened. This wasn't about Boston. It was about control. She was upset. You knew how she got. He sighed, looking older than I remembered. She had been telling everyone you had some kind of mental breakdown, that the job offer wasn't real. Cold washed through me. She was what? Called your Aunt Sarah, your cousins. Even mentioned something to Pastor Miller after church. He wouldn't meet my eyes, said you were making rash decisions because you were unstable. My mind raced ahead, cataloging connections, professional contacts, people whose opinions mattered. The story she was crafting would follow me, undermine me. Even in Boston, whispers had ways of traveling. She was trying to discredit me. The realization crystallized, sharp and clear. If people thought I was unstable, they wouldn't believe me about how she treated me. Dad shrugged helplessly. She was hurt, Madison. You knew how important family was to her. Family wasn't a weapon, Dad. I walked to the window, looking out at Manchester one last time. Tell Mom I received her message, and tell her that when she was ready to talk, as equals, I would be ready too. After he left, I added a new section to my to-do list, reputation management. I spent the evening emailing key contacts, former professors, mentors, friends in the industry, casually mentioning my exciting new position in Boston, creating witnesses to my stability and success before Evelyn's narrative could take root. By Sunday night, every box was sealed, every arrangement confirmed. I stood in my empty apartment, the echoing space a canvas for future possibilities. Daniel's visit forced adaptations to my plans, but encountering Evelyn's moves, I had grown stronger, more strategic. I traced my finger along the windowsill, saying goodbye to the view that had greeted me for 5 years. New Hampshire's mountains rose in the distance, familiar and beautiful. Tomorrow they would be in my rearview mirror. My phone buzzed with a text from Evan. "All packed? Need anything?" "All set," I typed back. "See you at 7. I curled up on the bare mattress, my suitcase packed for the drive tomorrow. In the stillness, I felt something unfamiliar taking root. Not fear, not anxiety, but a quiet confidence. Evelyn thought her ultimatum would break me. Instead, it freed me. Tomorrow I started the life I chose. I whispered to the empty room. The words hung in the darkness, a promise to myself that felt more binding than any I had made before. The threshold awaited. I was ready to cross it. I had settled into my office at the Boston Tribune, a space that felt more mine with each passing day. The newsroom hummed with the familiar cadence of journalism, keyboards clacking, phones ringing, the occasional burst of laughter. 1 month into my new position as features editor, and the initial nerves had given way to a steady confidence. My team respected me. My ideas mattered here. The morning light filtered through blinds I adjusted to my liking, no one dictating the proper angle they should hang. On my desk sat a framed photo of Evan and me at Boston Harbor, our first weekend exploration of our new home. No family portraits, no obligatory displays of Thompson family achievements. My phone buzzed with a text from Evan. "Lunch later? Found a place with those clam cakes you liked." I smiled, typing back a quick "yes please" when Sandra from reception appeared in my doorway, her usually composed face tight with concern. "Madison, there was someone demanding to see you in the lobby. Said she was your mother and it was a family emergency." The words hit like a physical blow. My shoulders tensed, my throat constricted. Of course she would come, of course. She was quite insistent, Sandra added, her expression suggesting this was an understatement. I took a deep breath, remembering Dr. Harper's words. Preparation creates power. You had built a foundation she couldn't shake. "Tell her I would be out in a moment," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Sandra nodded and retreated. I stood, smoothing my blazer, the emerald one I chose because I liked it, not because it met someone else's standards. I texted Evan quickly. "Emergency. Mom showed up at the office." His response came immediately. "On my way. You had got this." Walking through the newsroom felt like moving through water. Colleagues glanced up, sensing something in my stride. I passed Frank Webster's office, my boss, the editor-in-chief, and made a split-second decision. "Frank, did you have a minute?" I asked, knocking lightly on his open door. He looked up from his computer. "What was up, Thompson?" My mother had shown up unannounced in the lobby. There was no actual emergency, but she might claim there was. It was complicated family dynamics. The words came out with professional clarity. No apology, no shame. Frank's eyebrows rose slightly. "Need security?" "Hopefully not, but I wanted you to know what was happening." He nodded once. "Appreciated. Handle it however you needed to." This simple exchange, his trust in my judgment, strengthened my resolve as I continued toward the lobby. I heard her before I saw her. Evelyn Thompson's voice carried with practiced authority, the kind that expected immediate compliance. I needed to speak with my daughter immediately. She was not well. Evelyn Thompson. When I pushed through the glass doors into the lobby, the scene unfolded exactly as I feared. My mother stood at the reception desk in her camel haircoat, pearl earrings catching the light. Her Burberry scarf lay perfectly draped across her shoulders. She was dressed for battle in her finest armor. "Madison," she turned, face shifting instantly to a mask of maternal concern. Thank goodness, there had been a terrible situation. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice calm and measured. There was no emergency, was there? Her eyes narrowed slightly, recalculating. We needed to speak privately. Your father was beside himself with worry. 2 reporters waiting in the lobby for their interview subjects watched with undisguised interest. Sandra pretended to organize papers while listening intently. "I had a busy day scheduled," I said. "If you would like to meet for coffee after work, we could." This ridiculous Boston phase needed to end now. She cut me off, dropping the emergency pretense entirely. Her voice rose. "You had made your point. You had worried your father sick. Claire said you barely returned her calls." I could see the security guard shifting his position, moving closer. My professional reputation, everything I had built in this past month, hung in the balance of how I handled the next few minutes. "Mother, this wasn't the place for this conversation." I kept my tone measured, professional, though my heart hammered against my ribs. "Look at you playing editor," she scoffed, gesturing at my office attire. "Madison, you were having some kind of breakdown. First that photographer boyfriend, then abandoning your family." "Mrs. Thompson," the security guard interrupted. "I was going to have to ask you to lower your voice or take this outside." She turned on him with the full force of her indignation. "Did you know who I was?" My daughter was clearly unstable. She walked out on Christmas dinner, left her family behind. "Mother." My voice cut through hers, sharper than I intended. I took a breath, recalibrating. I was not having a breakdown. I had accepted a promotion. I had moved to a new city. These were normal adult decisions. Her face flushed with anger. There was nothing normal about turning your back on your family, on everything we had given you. I could see Frank watching through the glass doors now, ready to intervene if needed. 2 more colleagues had appeared, drawn by the commotion. All my careful planning for professional boundaries collided with Evelyn's desperate attempt to regain control. "Mrs. Thompson," the security guard said firmly, "I needed you to step outside now. This was ridiculous. Madison, get your things. We were going home." The moment stretched between us, her certainty that I would cave as I always had before. But something had changed. All the preparation of the past months clicked into place, like tumblers in a lock. "I was home," I said quietly. "This was where I worked. These were my colleagues. You couldn't come here and disrupt that." "You ungrateful," she began, but stopped as the security guard took a step forward. "Miss Thompson, should I escort your mother out?" he asked me. The realization that he was asking me what to do, not deferring to my mother's authority, shifted something fundamental between us. I saw the shock register on Evelyn's face. "Yes, please," I said, my voice steady. My mother was just leaving. "Madison." Her voice rose again, but the security guard moved between us. "Ma'am, let's step outside." As he guided her toward the door, she called back, "This wasn't over, Madison. Your father and I wouldn't stand for this behavior." The glass doors closed behind them. The lobby fell silent. I felt the weight of curious eyes on me. "Well," said Frank, who had emerged from the newsroom. "That was quite the morning drama." A nervous laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. I was so sorry about that. "Don't be," he said. "Families were complicated, but just so you knew, you handled that like a pro." I nodded, grateful for his understanding. If you would excuse me, I needed to make a call. Back in my office, I closed the door and dialed Dr. Harper. Her familiar voice centered me as I explained what happened. "You maintained boundaries while staying professional," she said. "That was exactly what we prepared for." "She came to my workplace," I said, the reality sinking in. "She was willing to destroy my professional reputation to get me back under control." "And how did that make you feel?" Dr. Harper asked. "Angry." The word came with surprising force. No, furious. She was never going to stop, was she? Not unless I made her. Angry. Through my office window, I could see the security guard escorting Evelyn to her car. Even at this distance, her rigid posture radiated indignation. My phone lit up with a text from Evan. "Just parked? Where were you?" I watched my mother's car pull away from the curb, tires squealing slightly on the pavement. Something shifted inside me, a final tumbler falling into place. "Dr. Harper, I needed to go. I knew what I had to do now. Madison, remember our strategies." I would. But this ended now. No more reacting to her moves. It was time for her to react to mine. I hung up, a strange calm settling over me. The past month of careful preparation, the strategies with Dr. Harper, the transparent communication with my boss, all of it had been building to this moment. Evelyn's desperate gambit had only solidified my resolve. When Evan appeared in my doorway, concern etched across his face, I stood to meet him. "You okay?" he asked, searching my expression. "No," I answered truthfully. But I would be. It was time to end this on my terms, not hers. The sunlight streamed through my office window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air between us. For the first time since Christmas, I felt not just prepared, but powerful. This ended now. I repeated the words a promise to myself more than anyone else. The next day, the hotel lobby gleamed with polished surfaces and muted elegance. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across marble floors. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner with 2 armchairs and a small table. Strategic positioning, back to the wall, clear sightlines to all entrances, public enough for safety, but private enough for candid conversation. My heartbeat remained steady as I waited. The preparations of the past months had built to this moment. I smoothed my dark green blouse, the color of growth, of new beginnings, and checked my phone. No messages from Evan, who waited nearby at a cafe across the street. Available if needed, but respecting my need to handle this myself. When Evelyn entered through the revolving door, I spotted her instantly. Her spine was ramrod straight, chin lifted, with the same imperious tilt I had seen at countless dinner parties. She wore cream-colored slacks and a cashmere sweater, the uniform of affluent New England motherhood. But something was different. Tiny details only a daughter would notice. A missed button, slightly smudged mascara, the absence of her customary pearl earrings. She scanned the lobby, gaze skipping over me once before returning with narrowed recognition. Even now she expected me to wave, to call out, to make things easier for her. I remained seated, hands relaxed in my lap. Madison. She said my name like she was testing it, approaching with measured steps. I saw you were still determined to be dramatic. Good morning, Evelyn. My voice came out calm, professional, the voice I used in editorial meetings. Thank you for agreeing to meet. She flinched at my use of her first name rather than Mom. A tiny victory that cost me nothing. This situation had gone far enough. She began, settling into the chair across from me, handbag perched precisely on her knees. Your father and I had decided we were willing to overlook this Boston nonsense if you— I didn't come to Boston to escape you, I interrupted, feeling the power in speaking truth. I came to find myself. Evelyn's mouth tightened. What exactly did that mean? Some spiritual journey nonsense you picked up from that photographer boyfriend? It meant I was finally building a life based on what I wanted, not what you expected. I kept my voice level, even as I felt the old anger rising like a tide. I had an apartment I loved, a job that challenged me, and relationships without conditions. Without conditions? Her laugh held no warmth. Grow up, Madison. Everything in life had conditions. The sooner you accepted that, the sooner. The newspaper's managing editor attended my Monday presentation. I continued, refusing to be derailed. He had asked me to develop a special feature series on community resilience. Community resilience, she repeated, making the word sound absurd. And what did that pay? Enough for ramen noodles and that thrift store wardrobe you insisted on wearing? Old buttons, expertly pushed, but I had disconnected the wires. My salary was adequate, but that wasn't really why you were here, was it? I leaned forward slightly. You were here because, for the first time, you couldn't control me. You couldn't predict what I would do next. Her eyes flashed. I was here because you humiliated me in front of your father, because your sister was worried sick, because this childish rebellion was hurting people who loved you. There it was, the manipulation that once would have sent me spiraling into guilt. The scene you created at my workplace was unacceptable, I said, my voice hardening. My colleagues now knew exactly who you were and why I moved across state lines. That wasn't my intention, but it was the consequence of your choices. Your choices had consequences too, Madison. Her voice dropped to the familiar threatening whisper that used to freeze my blood. Family names mattered at home. You knew that. I had spoken with the Morrison Foundation Board. They were a major funder of local journalism. One word from me about your instability. I cut her off with a raised hand. I had already met with Catherine Morrison. We had coffee last week after she reached out about my opioid series. Evelyn's composure slipped. She hadn't expected this, couldn't have known that Catherine and I connected over shared experiences with controlling mothers. The chess pieces I had methodically arranged over months now moved with devastating effectiveness. The board valued actual journalism, not gossip. I continued. Every threat you made only confirmed I made the right decision in December. A hotel employee passed nearby, glancing curiously at our tense tableau. Evelyn forced a brittle smile, always conscious of appearances. You had become so cold, she murmured, shifting tactics. This wasn't the daughter I raised. I was exactly the daughter you raised. The truth resonated between us. Observant, thorough, determined. I had just finally turned those qualities toward seeing our relationship clearly. Her fingers twisted the leather strap of her handbag. Claire's wedding was in September. Were you really planning to miss your only sister's wedding because of this tantrum? Claire knew how to reach me, I said, and it was her wedding, not yours. If she wanted me there, we would figure it out. Evelyn's phone buzzed. She glanced down, frowning at the screen before answering. Daniel, I told you not to call during... She paused, listening, her face draining of color. What did you mean you canceled it? I specifically told you. I watched the transformation with clinical detachment, the widening of her eyes, the sudden paleness around her mouth, as my father apparently delivered news she never expected to hear. We would discuss this when I got back. She snapped, ending the call. Was everything okay? I asked, not from obligation, but genuine curiosity. Evelyn stared at her phone as if it might bite. Your father canceled the club membership. 30 years of membership, our name on the founder's plaque, all because... She looked up, something unfamiliar in her expression. Confusion, uncertainty. She needs help, Madison. My father's voice emerged from the phone on speaker. She hadn't fully disconnected the call. I was taking her to see someone. My breath caught. In all my planning, I never expected this. My father finally standing up, setting his own boundaries. Evelyn jabbed at the phone, ending the call properly this time. He was overreacting. This ridiculous family drama had gotten to him. It wasn't drama, it was consequences. The words came easily now. You told me I was dead to you if I chose my career. I made my choice. Now you were facing yours. Her face crumpled momentarily before hardening again. So that was it? 29 years of motherhood erased because I pushed you to aim higher than some small-town newspaper? This wasn't about the newspaper. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze directly. It was about control. It was about conditional love. It was about punishing me for choices you didn't approve of, from journalism school to Evan to Boston. She glanced around the lobby, clearly uncomfortable with this public dissection. A young couple with suitcases gave us a wide berth, sensing the tension. I wanted what was best for you, she insisted, but the words sounded hollow, even to her. You wanted what you thought was best, I corrected her. There was a difference. Evelyn gathered her purse, preparing her exit strategy. When you had had time to think about this rationally, I had had months to think about it. I remained seated, refusing to rise for the customary Thompson family goodbye ritual. I had thought about little else. My terms were simple. I would consider contact when you were ready for a relationship between equals. No manipulation, no ultimatums, no controlling my career or relationship choices. And if I didn't agree to these terms, the word tasted bitter in her mouth, then nothing changed. I continued building my life in Boston. You continued in New Hampshire. We acknowledged that a relationship wasn't possible right now. She stood, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her slacks. You sounded like a lawyer drafting a contract, not a daughter. I sounded like an adult setting boundaries, I corrected her. When you were ready for a relationship between adults, I would be here. Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it. For perhaps the first time in my life, my mother had no prepared response, no counterattack. The realization of her powerlessness settled over her like an unfamiliar coat. She turned without another word, walking toward the revolving doors with measured steps. Her shoulders, usually perfectly squared, curved slightly inward. Not defeat. Evelyn Thompson didn't admit defeat, but perhaps the first recognition that victory was no longer possible. I remained seated, watching her disappear through the glass doors, the weight that had pressed against my chest since Christmas lifting completely. Not because I had won, but because I had finally stopped playing a game with rules designed to ensure I lost. My phone buzzed with a text from Evan. "Everything okay?" I typed back. "Better than okay. It was over. I was free." And for the first time since I could remember, those words felt absolutely true. I stood at the window of my Boston apartment, watching seagulls circle over the harbor. It had been 3 days since the confrontation with my mother in the hotel lobby, and I was still processing what happened. The weight I had carried for years had lifted, replaced by an unfamiliar lightness that made me feel almost buoyant. Dr. Harper's face filled my laptop screen during our virtual session. "How are you feeling about everything that happened?" Like I was finally breathing properly, I said, touching the windowsill. I didn't just stand up to her, I stood up for myself. That was an important distinction. Her voice carried the steady warmth that had anchored me through this transformation. Yesterday, I changed the headline on a feature piece without second-guessing myself for an hour first. I laughed at how small yet significant this felt. And last night, Evan and I picked a restaurant without me worrying about what Mom would think of the decor. Those everyday moments were where real freedom lived, Dr. Harper said. The editor-in-chief actually complimented my decisiveness on the city council corruption piece. Pride swelled in my chest, untainted by the voice in my head that always whispered I wasn't good enough. And I was sleeping better. No more 3 a.m. anxiety spirals about disappointing her. So I described how I had stopped checking my phone constantly for missed calls from New Hampshire, how colors seemed brighter, food tasted better, how Evan commented that my laugh sounded different, fuller, uninhibited by the constant awareness of potential criticism. "You were experiencing life without anticipatory anxiety," Dr. Harper observed. "This was what healing looked like, Madison." The morning light caught the edge of my coffee mug, the handmade one I bought at the farmer's market last weekend simply because I liked it, not because it matched anything or impressed anyone. "What was next?" she asked. "Everything," I answered. And for the first time, that didn't feel terrifying. 6 months later, I stood in the newsroom pinning the final layout for my feature series on community revitalization to the board. The promotion to senior editor came through last month, ahead of schedule. My team gathered around, their respect evident in their attentiveness. This was excellent work, everyone, I told them, meaning it. My voice carried a confidence that no longer felt borrowed. Later that evening, Evan and I walked along the Charles River as sunset painted the water in shades of gold. His fingers intertwined with mine, the vintage emerald ring on my left hand catching the light. "It told your story, not hers," he had said when he proposed last month. "Sophia invited us to her poetry reading this weekend," I said, referring to the friend I met at the Boston Writers' Circle, a connection I had cultivated without questioning whether my mother would approve. "I liked her," Evan said, squeezing my hand. "Your whole circle here, they were good people. They were. People who knew me as I was now, not as the perpetually disappointing daughter I was cast as in New Hampshire. People who valued my perspective without expecting me to earn my place at the table. Family was who treated you like family," I told him, watching sailboats return to harbor. Biology was just paperwork. My apartment had transformed. Books I genuinely wanted to read filled the shelves, not the prestigious titles Mom thought should be displayed. Art I loved brightened the walls, not pieces chosen for their resale value or recognition factor. Even my wardrobe had evolved, clothes that made me feel comfortable and confident, not just items that would pass Evelyn's inspection. I had stopped avoiding phone calls from New Hampshire area codes. When Claire called, our conversations had a new honesty. She was seeing the family dynamic differently now, asking questions about her own relationship patterns. Dad had started therapy, something I never imagined possible. Small changes, but significant ones. 1 year after the Christmas ultimatum that changed everything, I unlocked my mailbox to find an envelope with my mother's precise handwriting. My heart didn't race the way it once would have. I carried it upstairs, opened a window to let in the spring breeze, and carefully sliced the envelope open. The letter inside was 3 pages, front and back. Evelyn's penmanship was as perfect as ever, but there was something different in the tone. I had been working with someone, she wrote, a therapist. He was helping me understand patterns I never questioned. She acknowledged specific incidents, the school essay punishment, the pre-law ultimatum, the constant comparisons to Claire. Near the end, she wrote words I never expected to see. You were right to walk away. I sat with the letter for days before responding with a simple note. Thank you for your letter. I was open to a short video call after the holidays. When that call finally happened, I noticed changes immediately. She sat in her home office, perfectly groomed as always, but there was less rigidity in her posture. She asked about the flower arrangements before catching herself. I was sorry, she said, surprising me. That wasn't my place. This was your day. The conversation wasn't perfect. Old patterns didn't dissolve overnight. But there was a tentative new framework forming. One where I didn't need her approval to feel whole. And she was beginning to see me as a separate person worthy of respect. I was proud of the work you were doing, I told her, as we prepared to end the call, meaning both her therapy and her attempt to rebuild our relationship. After we disconnected, I stood at my window again, watching Boston bustle below. The woman who trembled at a Christmas dinner table a year ago felt like a different person, someone I had both become and always been beneath the weight of expectations. My next feature series would focus on family estrangement and reconciliation. My editor position allowed me to shed light on stories that might help others find their way. Evan and I were planning a honeymoon to places neither of us had seen. Life stretched before me, unscripted and mine to shape. When someone told you you were dead to them for choosing yourself, sometimes that was the moment you finally started living.